Afternoon. I'm pleased to be joined by Colonel Bill Bryant, Director of the Arkansas State Police. I have Secretary Solomon Graves, the Department of Corrections here, J.R. Hankins, who's the new director of our Law Enforcement Training Academy, has also joined us, and I want to thank them. The purpose that I wanted to have this conversation today was really related to the uptick in violent crime that we've seen in Little Rock, in central Arkansas over the last couple of weeks particularly. And there's questions that have arisen as to, well, what is the state doing to make sure that our laws are enforced and that we get a better handle on violent crime? And I wanted to answer that question today. And first, of course, the enforcement of our law primarily falls upon our local jurisdictions. It is the City of Little Rock Police Department that has the lead here in central Arkansas along with North Little Rock. We have the support given by the state, and the state has specific and defined responsibilities. And I want to go through some of the things that we've done as a state to address violent crime in Arkansas. And yes, in the end, I do have a comment to make about what happened in Crawford County over this last weekend. But first, let me go back. If you remember, we had the Power Ultra shooting in 2017 here in Little Rock. And as a result of that, we started the Gang Enforcement Task Force under my direction that this be established, that is federal authorities as well as state authorities working on gang violence here in central Arkansas. Colonel Bryant has been very engaged with that and has had success with the cooperation of the United States Attorney. But moving forward to more recent activities, first of all, you recall that I announced a $75 million prison expansion in the state. And I asked the legislature to support that. They set aside $75 million to build a new prison. Why is this important? Is because you have to have prison space for violent offenders. And you also have to be able to relieve the pressure of the backup in our local jurisdictions, our local sheriff's jails as well as the city jails, so that they can have the space for local offenders as well. And as a result of this effort, in January of this year, we had a backup of state prisoners in local jails of 2,605 backup. That has now been reduced to 2,029. It was actually lower than that, but there's sometimes an increase in the summer months. But that's about a 30% reduction in the county jail backup. And so we're expanding space to make sure for the future we can have sufficient space for violent offenders. Secondly, as we went through the pandemic, we had an incredible logjam in our state court system. And so cases were not being processed. That means there were more backed up, there were more people out on bond pending trial because they were not moving through. I put, with the support of the General Assembly, $1 million of restricted reserve funds to both prosecutors' offices and public defenders to help move these cases. An example of that result is that that we were able to hire 21 additional deputy prosecuting attorneys, and in one district, one extra deputy was able to complete and close 264 cases. And so that was a significant investment in our court system to move cases along and to free up space and to reduce that logjam. In addition, to make this a permanent fix and permanent relief, I've asked the General Assembly to approve $4.5 million for additional state prosecutors and $4.5 million for additional public defenders. This will go before the Legislative Council this week. We've also, as an important part of the state's responsibility and the need in our communities, we've increased our efforts in mental health, which is a significant challenge for law enforcement and those that are trying to maintain peace in our communities. And so we've had, for example, our crisis stabilization units that police can divert from the jail system into mental health units where they can get the support that they need. We have 4 units, one in Fort Smith, one in Fayetteville, one in Jonesboro, and one in Central Arkansas. I've asked the General Assembly to allocate $3 million for an additional facility in South Arkansas, the Crisis Stabilization Unit. That will be considered by the Legislative Council this week. And then I want to spend a little bit of time on my most recent announcement that we're going to put $1 million into an intensive supervision program here in Central Arkansas. We have those that are out on parole, and if they have a history of aggravated offenses, even though they've been released from custody, they're out on parole. We want to make sure we have the resources to keep a good eye on them, to make sure that they're reporting, that they're doing what they're supposed to do. If they get into problems, we know about it. We either can fix it or we can file parole revocation charges against them. I put $1 million of my discretionary funds into this intensive supervision program that's led by the Division of Community Corrections. And so, for an example, we had 6 officers that were involved in this intensive supervision effort. Now we have 14, and this covers a 5-county area. That means that 251 parolees are under intensive supervision to do more home checks, to do verifications, to do additional searches as needed. And there's been a good result of this effort. Not perfect, but it is increasing the supervision of those that are on parole. And I wanted to look at one graph here that illustrates some of the results of this intensive supervision program. If you look on the left, January to April, and I made the announcement of this investment in additional officers for intensive supervision in April. So January to April, we had 28 arrests of parolees. We had 4 firearms that were seized. And then in April, we announced the officer expansion with more intensive supervision. The result is, since April, 109 arrests since the expansion, with 48 firearm seizures since the expansion as well. And this has resulted in additional arrests, prosecutions, taking guns off the street, which is an important part of enforcing the law here in Arkansas. And I will make a comment that in the last session, Senator Dismang sponsored legislation that I signed into law that enhanced the penalties in Arkansas for a felon in possession of a firearm. While historically we've diverted those offenses to federal prosecution because they would get hit harder, we now have just as severe penalties, if more so, under our state system. And so we're able to give that heavy penalty for those felons that are not, convicted felons that are not following the law, that have a dangerous background and have a possession of a firearm which would be illegal. And so those are a couple of things that we are doing as a state. I could go on, but we're very engaged, and I want to remark on the state police that not this last weekend, but the weekend before, the state police was very instrumental in supporting with intensive resources the investigation, the apprehension of the suspects with the weekend of violence that we had, supporting and working closely with the Little Rock PD and the Central Arkansas law enforcement authorities, and I applaud the state police for their extraordinary effort to keep the peace and to apprehend the suspects a weekend ago. And now finally, let me make a comment about what we all saw with great sadness and concern over the weekend, which was the video of the arrest in Mulberry and Crawford County. There were 3 officers that were on that video. First of all, that is reprehensible conduct in which a suspect is beat in that fashion. We saw a glimpse of that. It is under investigation. We don't have all of the details, and certainly that suspect had a history of concern that was legitimate for the officers, but what that response was not consistent with the training that they receive as certified officers with the Arkansas Law Enforcement Training Academy. That will be investigated by the state police. I understand that the U.S. Attorney and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice will be conducting a separate investigation. I've talked to I've talked to the sheriff of Crawford County. I relayed my understanding of the circumstances, and we discussed the investigation that will ensue. He certainly promised all the cooperation, and I thought his comment that they hold the officers to a high standard, immediate action was taken, and that was important for the public to see that in this case. And so the investigation will continue by the state police as well as by federal authorities. But I did want to say this is not what our law enforcement community represents. It's not the proper response, and they will be reviewed and appropriate action taken consistent with what the investigation we learned from that and what the results are. With that, I wanted to ask Secretary Graves to make a comment about the intensive supervision, and then ask Colonel Bryant to make a comment about the state police activity, and then we'll take any questions.
Good afternoon. I want to first begin by thanking the governor again for his support of our intensive supervision efforts here in Central Arkansas. We know there is a segment of our community supervision population that, because of their previous criminal history, is at a higher risk, and we want to make sure that we have adequate resources in place to give that segment of our population the adequate attention that it requires. The numbers that the governor presented speak for themselves. As we have increased the resources for this program, we have seen increases in confiscation, both of illegal narcotics, but also of weapons. We've also seen increases in the numbers of arrests being made by that program. Beginning last week, we implemented a saturation effort here in Central Arkansas, where over a 3-day period, last Thursday through yesterday, Sunday, we had 295 planned home visits here in the Little Rock area. Of those 295 home visits, which was a collaboration between our intensive supervision team and our regular parole and probation officers, we had 172 direct contacts, resulting in 7 arrests for new felony charges over the weekend and an additional 5 firearms that were confiscated. Last month, by way of comparison, we confiscated 18 weapons during the entire month of July through our intensive supervision program. Those 18 weapons were in the hands of 7 different offenders. So the offenders that we're finding have multiple weapons, and they have weapons for one reason, and that is to harm and, unfortunately, potentially kill other individuals. That is something we cannot tolerate as a community. I want to echo the sentiments of the governor. This is going to require the continued partnership between our Division of Community Correction and our partners in local law enforcement and prosecuting attorneys. We have strengthened the penalties that these offenders are subjected to for carrying a firearm, and we have to make sure that we are implementing those penalties to the fullest extent of the law in order to protect our communities. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Bryant, the Colonel of the Arkansas State Police. And Governor, thank you for allowing us to come today. And we're very fortunate with our governor. He is a strong supporter of the rule of law and has always supported law enforcement. But I just want to visit a couple of weeks ago when we had all the shootings in the Little Rock area, and just wanted to kind of inform you how it took place a little bit, that right away we established communication with Interim Chief Wayne Bewley of the Little Rock Police Department. And right away we decided, we saw the number of shootings occurring. We established a unified command at the Arkansas State Police headquarters. And we got the information out quickly of what we had. And fortunately, one of our troopers observed the vehicle, and he got back up, and we ended up getting in a pursuit with the vehicle. But we also, what we did is we brought in over 32 troopers that day. We have an all call in Troop A, where we brought in 32 troopers, where we saturated the interstates until we could capture the suspect. We also activated our helicopter, our aviation unit, and we got the helicopter airborne. But it was a great joint operation between us, the Little Rock Police Department, and the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office. We worked well together. By statute, we are an assist agency, so we assist everybody in the state. We also pulled some numbers as far as weapon seizures for here in Troop A. Troop A, what we call the metro area, it's really 4 counties. It's Faulkner, Pulaski, Saline, and Lone Oak. But in 2021 to the present, we have seized 310 firearms. 30 of those were full auto, with a switch for the pistols that make it full auto. So we're working closely with the Central Arkansas law enforcement agencies to combat the violence problem we have. We also work with the FBI on what we call WAVE. It's working against violent entities, to where they have an intelligence or in an area. Then we work with the Get Rock Task Force and on these WAVE operations and attack the areas where the hot spots are. So we were very fortunate in the state. We're a small state, but the local, city, county, and federal agencies work very closely together. Again, our relationship, not only with Little Rock Police Department, but Pulaski County and agencies around the state, they depend on the state police, and we're always ready to respond to any request for assistance.
Thank you, Bill. With that, we'll take any questions.
Have you had any conversations with the mayor of Little Rock and what issues that they're seeing?
I've talked in the past numerous occasions from time to time with Mayor Scott. Of course, I visit with the mayor of North Little Rock as well. And our coordination is primarily through our law enforcement agencies. We're available for additional support as needed, because we all have an interest in keeping this area safe.
Are the officers in Crawford County suspended with pay, and what does the timeline look like for that investigation?
They are suspended. They're on administrative leave, and the timeline for the investigation is really up to the state police. Let me ask Colonel Bryant if you want to comment on that investigation.
We've assigned that investigation to what we call our special investigation units. It's going to take some time. They're out there working right now to gather the facts and the evidence. And once we get the facts and evidence, they prepare a case file and a summary, and then we'll turn it over to the prosecutor, who then will decide what the appropriate charges are.
So are they suspended with pay?
Yeah, if they're on administrative leave, suspended with pay. For 2 from Crawford County Sheriff's Office and 1 from Mulberry Police Department.
When do we expect to see body cam footage released that the officers?
Again, they're out there getting that information, and then 2, it's up to the prosecutor, since it's an ongoing investigation, whether or not the body cam footage will be released.
Was there a particular, the state police is doing an investigation. Did you call the sheriff today just to give a heads up what you're going to say, or when did you actually call him and why?
Well, I called him today, and I called him to understand more of the facts, if there were any additional facts that I was not aware of. I only saw the video, and I wanted to talk to the sheriff, and that was the purpose of it. And we had a good conversation, and I certainly offered any assistance as this investigation continues, which will be done through the state police.
In response to the increased violence that we're seeing, I know that there is this increased, stricter parole system, that you've seen some results with that. In response to this video, I know you mentioned that these officers didn't follow their training. Is there any sort of push you're looking for further police training in the state, in that county, any kind of response to this?
Well, that's something we'll always look at, but let's let's go back. Of course, we had, after the George Floyd protest, we created a law enforcement advancement task force that had everyone from police to activists that were on this task force that made some very specific recommendations in looking at enhanced training and what we can do more. And so there has been some adjustments and increased training as a result of the recommendations of that task force. And they're implemented at Toledo. They actually increased the number of training hours. And so that's in place. Now, the challenge is that you can train, but you know, officers have to be able to follow that training and put it into practice. And JR, did you want to comment? Are you familiar enough with that? Did you have anything else to add there? Yeah. JR's in charge of that training now.
The governor's exactly right. We've got 24 hours of mandatory training, includes a mandatory duty to intervene. But we can do all the training, but unless our officers follow that training, then it's all for naught.
To follow with that, is there a possibility that these officers will be charged criminally?
That is up to the prosecuting attorney. So obviously, whenever you're looking at investigations, I think everything would be on the table as far as the result of that investigation by the state police, but also any charging decision by the prosecuting attorney.
You started your comments referring to a gang violence task force. Does that still exist?
Yes, it does. Yep,
Working.
it's still in operation. That cooperation is there. Both the federal participation, but also through state police and through our Department of Corrections, all working together in a task force.
The 17 shootings the previous weekend, have we determined that that was a small group of people that were involved in that? And how many would you say that were involved in all those shootings?
Well, it is a small number of people that would have been involved in those shootings. We're looking at the background of the individuals responsible. Some of that is still under investigation, but the quick action of law enforcement really resulted in their apprehension, and that stopped the shooting. And that's the most important thing, to assure the public that the shooting did stop because of the quick response of law enforcement. Bill, do you have anything to add to that?
As you know, the state police, we were assigned 6 of those investigations. We have not charged anyone. It's still ongoing. We're waiting for ballistic evidence back. I know Little Rock has charged the suspect with the Valero shooting and another shooting, but we're all working together, all 3 agencies, to combine our evidence and then determine what additional charges are going to be filed. But our 6 right now are still ongoing. 2 of our victims were shot and required surgery, one at UAMS and the other one at St. Vincent's.
Did we determine if that was family-related, domestic, or possibly gang-related? Have we determined any of
At this time, no clear motive. It appears that a lot of it is random, just random shooting.
So have y'all decided to actually approach this as a mental health issue? Is there, because most normal people, what I consider normal, would not go around shooting 17 people.
That's correct. You know, we'll explore all avenues on what the cause was, whether it involved drugs or any other thing, but it's too early to say right now without being positive about, you know, the cause of these shootings.
What about that shooting this past Friday? It's like the Wild West on President Clinton Avenue. You've got 2 people gunning for each other at 3:30 in the afternoon.
Right. I'm not familiar with the details on that. I know we had another shooting on Interstate 30 in Scott Hamilton Saturday, I believe. We think it was a road rage in that incident. It wasn't related. But as far as the one down in President Clinton Avenue, I would refer you to the Little Rock Police Department because I don't know all the details on that shooting.
I think I believe we have a question remotely. Hearing nothing. Anything else? All right.
Do you have the ratio for how many parole officers to parolees right now?
Solomon?
For our regular parole, we're about 80 to 1. We cap intensive supervision at half that, so no more than 40 offenders to every one ISP officer we have.
Thank each of you for being here today. Have a good afternoon.